What's up, everybody? It's Roman Gennaro, host of the Empire Sports Talk podcast. And yes, I am wearing a Santa hat because it is a week before Christmas and I'm feeling festive. With this being the last episode of 2024, I wanted to wear the Santa hat. So bear with me on that. A lot we want to cover today, hopefully in a shorter period of time, get you out of here a little bit quicker. First thing I want to mention, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the NBA, but I do want to congratulate the Milwaukee Bucks on winning the NBA Cup. They become the second all-time winners of the in-season tournament, with the Lakers winning it last year. Now, I want to make it clear, and I said this last year, many people thought that I was automatically invalidating LeBron, but I want to make it clear because obviously one of the players on the Bucks is Damian Lillard, and I love Damian Lillard. He's my favorite player in the NBA, has been for a long time, even when he was in Portland. I want to reiterate the statement I made last season about the NBA Cup. It is a fun, early season, in-season thing that happens, but I do not think NBA Cups should be taken into consideration when it comes to counting accomplishments at the end of a career as far as Hall of Fame candidacy. People came for me and many others right away last year assuming that we were using it to knock LeBron down, because there were people out there that wanted to count it as his fifth championship. And I don't believe this NBA Cup title should be looked at as a championship, because the way that I see it is college basketball has done in-season tournaments for a long time now. But yes, you are crowned the Big 12 ACC championship winner or the Maui Invitational champion. But at the end of the season, it's not, oh, this team won the NCAA tournament, but this other team won the Maui Invitational in December, so they're also co-champions with the champion of the NCAA tournament. No, it's universally recognized that the only champion that matters at the end of the season is the one that won the big tournament. And so not to invalidate what the Bucks did here in the NBA Cup, and I think this year it's more widely accepted that this doesn't really count for anything. I think last year just the LeBron fans were freaking out about it. But as much as I love Damian Lillard and Giannis for that matter, this NBA Cup doesn't count for anything as far as other than you won the right games at the right time. Because the other weird thing about it, and I mentioned this last year, is that the NBA Cup is not a consecutive event. And I honestly think that could help improve it. Like, the NBA Cup games happen during the regular season, randomly dispersed throughout multiple weeks. So you could go from an NBA Cup game and then play 3 straight regular season games and then back to an NBA Cup game. It's hard to keep track of. It's not like you have to rev up to win 16 games to win an NBA championship. You just have to win the right games at the right point of the week for a month and a half. And so from that standpoint, I think it does take a little bit of the excitement out of the NBA Cup. I understand why it would be difficult to schedule them consecutively, because you have group play and then quarterfinals, semifinals, and teams are getting eliminated. And so it would be weird in the middle of the regular season for teams to be sitting out for days at a time. But I feel like the way to get around that, because there's already so many off days, so many rest days in the NBA, like there are teams that only play once a week as it is. You push the NBA Cup games closer together, and then when a team gets eliminated from group play, they're only sitting for maybe a week. Maybe it takes a week to get through the quarterfinals, semifinals. I don't think that would be that bad, and I think it would help the viewership of the NBA Cup significantly, because I know for me this year I was like, okay, so NBA Cup games were played this day, but they're not played again until next Wednesday, so that makes it a little bit difficult to pay attention to it. I will say that playing 2K this year, they brought the NBA Cup into the game, and those games were extra fun when they popped up on the calendar, and I wanted my team to win them even more. But I feel like it'd be more interesting if they were treated as actual tournaments, consecutively played, and you got to get hot for a stretch of time. You go through group play consecutively, you make it out of the you make it to the quarterfinals, or you don't, and you just go. Treat it like any other tournament in any other sport. do it all at once. There are logistics to be worked out, but I think for the better of the game, I feel like it would be better, because anytime you don't have to break something like that up, it's good. It's better for the game. Moving on to Major League Baseball really quick. Don't want to spend a lot of time here, but I do want to mention, since the last episode, Juan Soto signed a record $765 million contract over 15 years to play for the New York Mets. So he does spurn the Bronx for Queens. And this is the largest contract, definitely in the history of baseball, we've seen. Last year we were talking about Shohei becoming the first $700 million player. Now you have 765. And the money in sports in general is just getting ridiculous, but the money in baseball in particular. One of the comments underneath, there was a comparison of how much money Juan Soto made. One of the things that baffled me is that there was a comparison when Juan Soto's contract was announced of the money he's getting paid in this contract and the money that Robert Kraft paid for the New England Patriots in 1994. And for context, the New England Patriots are now worth $6 billion. But in 1994, Robert Kraft paid $172 million. And that is roughly 5 times less than what Juan Soto is getting paid over the next 15 years. And one of the comments underneath that was, play baseball, kids, because the money in baseball is ridiculous. And just for fun, because that comparison was so shocking to me, I wanted to do a little experiment to see what teams Juan Soto could purchase and be the sole owner of with his contract. And we'll start with the fact that Juan Soto's contract is worth more than the last recorded sale price of all but 6 NFL franchises. And those 6 NFL franchises are the Washington Commanders, who were sold for $6.05 billion in 2023, the Denver Broncos at $4.65 billion in 2022, the Carolina Panthers at $2.28 billion in 2018, the Buffalo Bills at $1.4 billion in 2014, the Miami Dolphins at $1.1 billion in 2008, and the Cleveland Browns at $1.05 billion in 2012. Those are the only 6 NFL teams that Juan Soto could not afford outright with his new contract. All the rest, totally within his price range. Now, I wanted to take that a step further and say, what other franchises could Juan Soto basically pay cash with? If he cashed his entire Mets contract, and who could he buy? I want to take it a step further. We already know he can pay for all but 6 NFL teams. But he could also become the sole owner of the Anaheim Ducks, the San Jose Sharks, the Seattle Sounders, Toronto FC, DC United, New York City FC, the Portland Timbers, the Ottawa Senators, the Buffalo Sabres, Austin FC, the Carolina Hurricanes, the Columbus Blue Jackets, and the reigning Stanley Cup champion, Florida Panthers. If you got a kid out there that wants to play professional sports, let him know it pays to play baseball. The money in baseball is just ridiculous. Juan Soto's contract is also more than the combined amount of Bryce Harper and Trey Turner's last contracts with the Phillies. I want to spend the rest of the time on college football, as we are days away from the inaugural 12-team college football playoff kicking off. And the first thing I want to do is congratulate Travis Hunter on being named this year's Heisman Trophy winner. He becomes the second two-way player to win the award after Charles Woodson in 1997. Many, including myself, believe it should have gone to Ashton Jeanty. from Boise State because he had just an unreal season, beating the numbers of the last 4 Heisman winners at running back. But I think so many people just got enamored with the two-way play of Travis Hunter and the fact that he played every snap, which is nothing to sneeze at. I think both of these guys deserve the Heisman Trophy because what they did at their respective positions for their respective teams, and in Hunter's case, on both sides of the ball, should be marveled. So before I go any further, I want to congratulate Travis Hunter on winning the Heisman Trophy. I'm not going to go into the argument for Ashton Jeanty because the award's over, and if you want to see that, you can watch last week's episode where I talked about it. But what I do want to mention, because what I've seen a lot online this week, is that not only did Travis Hunter win the Heisman Trophy, but he also won the Biletnikoff Award, which is the award for the nation's best wide receiver, and the Bednarik Award, which is the award for the nation's best defensive player. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to take the Heisman away from him, but I don't think that Travis Hunter deserved, statistically, to win these other 2 awards. I don't believe he was the best wide receiver in the nation, and I don't believe he was the best defensive player in the nation, and you just have to look at the stats of the other finalists. We'll start with the Biletnikoff Award, which is the award for best wide receiver. Travis Hunter finished with 92 catches, 1,152 yards, 14 touchdowns. He also had a rushing touchdown, so we'll make it 15. Tetairoa McMillan from Arizona, I hope I'm saying that correctly, had 84 receptions for 1,319 yards and 8 touchdowns. Nick Nash from San Jose State had 104 receptions for 1,382 yards and 16 touchdowns. So just by looking at those stats, Nick Nash was snubbed for the Biletnikoff Award. And it turns out that he plans on sitting out of San Jose State's bowl game because of the snub. He had more touchdowns than Travis Hunter. He had more catches than Travis Hunter, and he had 230 more yards than Travis Hunter. Now, I feel like Nick Nash was robbed because he plays for San Jose State. He's not coached by Deion Sanders. And Travis Hunter plays both ways. But if you're going to use the argument that Travis Hunter plays both ways, if you're going to use the argument that he played pretty much every snap, you have to look at his numbers from that side of the ball. If you combine those numbers with his defensive numbers, sure, there's your Heisman, best all-around player. There it is. But if you're talking about just the best wide receiver in the country, not the most talked about, not the wide receiver with the loudest coach, not the wide receiver with the best full resume because he also plays defense, the best wide receiver in the country, it should have gone to Nick Nash. So I don't think he should have won the Biletnikoff Award. Now we move on to the Bednarik Award, which is the award for best defensive player in college football. Starting with Travis Hunter, he had 31 total tackles, 20 solo tackles, 11 pass deflections, 4 interceptions, and 1 forced fumble. Abdul Carter from Penn State had 60 tackles, which included 37 solos, 10 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. Caleb Downs, who is a safety, who also happens to be the younger brother of Indianapolis Colts wide receiver Josh Downs, had 61 tackles, 33 solo tackles, half a sack, 3 pass deflections, and 1 interception. This is the more egregious oversight than the Biletnikoff Award because both the other finalists with Travis Hunter had more solo tackles than Hunter had total tackles. I believe this award should have gone to Abdul Carter. You factor in the 60 tackles and the 10 sacks. I think Abdul Carter of Penn State was robbed of the Bednarik Award. You can make the argument that Travis Hunter is the most outstanding player in the country, certainly, because he plays both ways. But if you separate out his statistics, he does not match up against other wide receivers and other defensive players in the country this season. And I believe that there were players on either side that were robbed of recognition because of, whether it be because he was a Heisman finalist, they thought he should also win these awards, or because he plays for a high-profile school with a high-profile coach, whatever the reason may be. I just don't think Travis Hunter's individual offensive and defensive stats stacked up to the players that play these positions full-time. So I do believe that Nick Nash and Abdul Carter, respectively, got robbed of the Biletnikoff and Bednarik awards. But again, I don't want to take anything away from Travis Hunter for winning the Heisman Trophy for the nation's most outstanding player. That's just my feeling on those particular awards. The last couple things I want to touch on here is I want to draw attention, because not only do I do this podcast, but I also have EmpireSportsTalk.com, where I go more into depth on some things. And I'm releasing a couple articles this week based on things I've been thinking about that have to do with college football and the college football playoff. So you can go to EmpireSportsTalk.com and read my more in-depth thoughts. The second thing I'm going to talk about, which is the playoff itself, it doesn't come out until next week, so keep an eye out on that. But the first thing I want to mention is Ohio State Buckeyes head coach Ryan Day. Many people thought that ever since they lost to Michigan, and for Ryan Day that was the fourth straight loss to Michigan, that he should be on the hot seat. And so the question in my mind that needs to be asked, he hasn't beaten Michigan since 2019. The question in my mind that needs to be asked is, should the Buckeyes move on from Ryan Day if he doesn't win the national title? I know that's an eye roll. That's an interesting topic considering they are in the playoff. But the way that I look at it is that with a school like Ohio State, you're not expected to get into the playoff. You're expected to win the whole thing. And you're certainly expected to beat your arch rival, a rival that on game day you don't even mention, or on game week you don't even mention the school. You cross out or black out every letter M across the entire campus. You don't even breathe this team's name during football season, right? It's called the game. It's not even called Ohio State, Michigan. It's called the game. You refer to them as the team up north. So you're setting the bar for this game extraordinarily high. And Ryan Day has now not beaten them since 2019. You almost give them a pass for last year because it was Harbaugh and McCarthy, and they ended up winning the national title. But this year they were 7-5. They weren't good this year. And the Michigan defense held Ohio State to 10 points and just made them look really bad. And then there was a fight on the field, and Ryan Day just stood by looking defeated. And so I think there's a distinct possibility, and I've heard this around, so I'm not just making this up, that unless Ohio State lifts the college football trophy, they could move on from Ryan Day, because the expectations at Ohio State are to win championships. And because of the reputation of Ohio State, because of who they are, because of the history, because of the expectation and the NIL money and all this other stuff, Ohio State will always be near the top of the list for recruiting classes and for players transferring to get NIL money and all this stuff. It really doesn't have anything to do with Ryan Day. It has to do with it's the Ohio State University. So it really doesn't matter who the coach is. The only thing holding you in place at a school like Ohio State is not getting to a 12-team playoff, because that should be a foregone conclusion for a team like Ohio State. It's winning the thing. And Ryan Day does not have a history of being able to win the big game. He doesn't even have a history of being able to beat his bitterest rival. And I know I've mentioned this many times on the podcast, mentioned it many times in the blogs, and I even mention it in the post that I'm referring to. I'm reminded of Alabama head coach Del Curry. I'm sorry. I'm reminded of Alabama head coach Bill Curry, who coached the team from 87 to 89. And before Nick Saban, Curry had the second highest win percentage since Bear Bryant at the school. But he only coached 3 years, and he said at the end of 89, he knew that was it because he went 0-3 against Auburn, the team's most hated rival. He said, he had a quote where he said, "I knew I wouldn't get 3 shots at Auburn, miss, and keep my job." He knew he was gone after 3 years. This is now a 5-year stretch for Ryan Day where he's gone 1-4 against his school's biggest rival. And Auburn, Alabama is pretty much the only rivalry in sports that can even touch Ohio State, Michigan. Those are the 2 biggest rivalries in college football. And if the Alabama head coach said, "I knew I wouldn't get another shot," and he had less shots than Ryan Day, I think there's a better than 50% chance that if Ohio State has an early exit, Ryan Day could be moving on. And they do have a good heir apparent in Columbus in Chip Kelly. And I do believe the mere presence of Chip Kelly could bring in more recruits than the mere presence, if you factor out the tradition, if you factor out the Ohio State University, if you factor out all the stuff that's going to automatically bring in people, factor out the NIL money. If it's, do you want to play for Ryan Day or do you want to play for Chip Kelly? I feel like Chip Kelly's reputation and who Chip Kelly is and the excitement of his offenses in the past is going to bring in more players on its own than Ryan Day. I think Ryan Day is a good coach. I think it'd be a little bit silly to move on from him if now that they're in the playoff, but I would understand it because the standard at Ohio State is winning championships, not competing for them. The other thing I want to mention, and I know I'm going to get a lot of heat for this, but obviously we're sitting here talking about the 12-team playoff. And after going through the debates of who should get in and who shouldn't get in and who is in and who's not, I think the conclusion that I and many others have come to is that 12 teams is too many. I think sports all around, Major League Baseball, NBA, NFL, college football, have all tried expanding playoffs, and I think that's going in the wrong direction. Even the NCAA tournament that had 64 teams decided, you know what, we need 4 more for no reason. We don't need to be expanding playoffs. Playoffs are for the best of the best to fight it out for a championship. In the NBA now, because of the play-in tournament, more than 2/3 of the league make the playoffs. It hasn't become the best of the best. It's become only the worst of the worst get kept out. And this is not a diatribe about the overall expansion of playoffs and how that's going in the wrong direction, although that is what I believe. I just think if we're sitting here talking about the first 2 out of the playoff were Alabama and Miami had a really bad loss to Syracuse. Miami had a questionable loss to Georgia Tech. Alabama had several losses, many of them that didn't look good. They didn't look good against Vandy. They looked really bad against 5-5 Oklahoma, lost 24-3, and they had some wins that looked really bad. Obviously, there were people that thought that South Carolina should have made the playoff. But Alabama trailed to South Carolina for a really long time. If Carson Beck hadn't thrown 4 interceptions, Alabama would have gotten dump trucked by Georgia because they were up 30-7 and still had to get a last-second touchdown to win that game. So there were so many question marks on Alabama's season, one of the worst that I've seen in a while, and I've been watching Alabama football for my entire life. And they were still almost in. If we're debating what 3 lost teams should get a chance to play for a national championship, there's too many teams. Now, this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I had no problem with the BCS. I had no problem with computers being like, these are the 2 that are going to play for the national championship. I understand why it was expanded to a 4-team playoff, because people were like, oh, you're just going to let computers decide it, and what about this 3rd team that got left out? What about this 4th team? But that's, a championship game is between 2 teams. And When the 14 playoff was announced, it was like, this doesn't solve the problem. It just pushes it further down. It goes from who's the second team, who's in, who's out. Now you push it down from second and third to fourth and fifth. They said, this isn't working for us, let's push it down again. Now the question is between 12 and 13. That's not solving anything. That's just kicking the can down the road. And so I look at the situation we have now, that we have 4 teams that get byes. Oregon, Georgia, Boise State, and Arizona State. And I get that's because they won conference championships. And so you look at that and you're like, okay, Boise State won the Mountain West. And Arizona State won the Big 12, but like they came out of nowhere. Nobody was making noise about Arizona State until they were playing in the Big 12 championship. And yes, I get it, they were 11-2, that's impressive. But Indiana only had 1 loss, and people were saying they don't belong here because they lost to Ohio State. And the game was a lot closer than the score of that game. But if you look at Arizona State's schedule, ahead of beating Iowa State in the Big 12 championship, who Iowa State was looking pretty good until they tailed off at the end, they haven't played anybody. Their losses were to unranked Texas Tech and unranked Cincinnati. The teams they beat: Wyoming, UCF, Mississippi State, Texas State, Kansas, Oklahoma State. These are teams that haven't been good in a long time. Mississippi State hasn't competed for anything in the SEC since Dak Prescott went to the NFL. Gus Malzahn just left UCF behind. This is not a strong schedule. They beat BYU towards the end of the year, but BYU was tailing off too. So you could say their only legitimate wins on the season were to BYU in November and Iowa State in the Big 12 championship, and yet here they are with a bye week. Nobody's talking about them for 11 weeks, and they're one of the 4 teams with a bye week just because they won a Big 12 championship with a pretty weak schedule, if we're being honest. Then you look at the ACC, where Clemson won the ACC, doesn't even get a bye, and then somehow ends up as a lower seed than the team that they beat in the ACC championship game. If you're going to make an argument that winning a conference championship game matters, why is Clemson rated lower than SMU? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. My solution to this, and I know that I'm going to get slammed for this, but I just think it would make a lot more sense, is shrink the field from 12 teams down to 8 teams. There are no byes. There are no bye weeks in this model. And in this scenario, you would just take the top 8, so you would pull out Indiana, Clemson, SMU, and Tennessee. And to be honest, I'm okay with that. I don't think any of those 4 teams, if pulled out, nobody would be crying over that. Then the only question mark you would have left after that is still Arizona State sitting there at the 4. But there's no byes, so in this scenario it doesn't matter. And then you're being like, you'll still have the arguments about 8 and 9, how does that solve anything? I'm suggesting, and this is the part that I think that we're going to get destroyed by. At the time in the BCS, we did not live as analytically friendly as we do now. We did not have all these advanced stats at our disposal the way that we do now. So the computers had less to go on. My suggestion is you go back to the BCS model where you let the computer crunch all the numbers and spit out the top 8 teams. Now, because we decided to take it away from the BCS model and put it in the hands of humans. But when you're talking about humans, you're talking about human error. And there was a period where when we were debating this 12-team playoff, that we said, oh, should there be as many as 5 SEC teams? So I think, which Obviously, the answer to that is no, because then it just becomes the SEC Invitational. So I think, are there flaws to this? Yes. I'm not suggesting this is a perfect model. But if you pare it down from 12 to 8, you get rid of teams such as Tennessee, Indiana, SMU, and Clemson. Now, I loved the season that Indiana had. They had one loss. It was to an Ohio State team. Curt Cignetti was named Coach of the Year. But their schedule had one tough game and they lost it. This would force teams to schedule those big games. Because then you look at that, there's only 8 spots. And the computer is going to be looking at our strength of schedule. The computer is going to be looking at who we played. There's no automatic buys for conference championships. So a team like Arizona State that only played a couple of tough opponents, I'm not saying this is perfect. I just think something needs to change, because if we're sitting here talking about a 3-loss Alabama team, a 2-loss Miami team where both losses were question marks, or a 3-loss South Carolina team to play for a national championship, to be considered for the tournament that's supposed to be the best of the best, I think something is wrong. So my suggestion is an 8-team playoff with no buys, and allow the computer to, at the very least, get the first crack at picking the top 8. If you want to pass those top 8 onto a committee after that and be like, do you have a problem with this? And they can do whatever, fine, whatever. But I think in the age of advanced analytics, when we can quantify anything that we want to, when we have so much data at our fingertips, give it back to the computer. Let Watson be the Swami. Let Watson tell you these are the 8 teams that should play for a national championship. It's not perfect, but that's my suggestion. That's all I have for you on this final episode of Empire Sports Talk for the year. I am so thankful for all the support that we have gotten for this. I got a nice message this morning from a friend of ours in the UK. Shout out to our friend Jack. They let me know that there are those of you out there that actually appreciate this, and I'm so appreciative of you. And I just want to give one more thanks in 2020 for all of the growing that we've done together. And until 2025, I want to say subscribe to our YouTube channel and all of our social media. And we cannot wait to hear from you in 2025. And until then, have a Merry Christmas, and I'll see you on the next one.